This is not just about the past. This is about being a platform and being a pillar and being a force for helping ourselves and helping each other have a greater sense of justice and equity.
Hello, one and all. I am so glad that you're with us today. My name is Andrew Racinos, and I am the president of the Tessitura Network, a nonprofit technology, service, and community organization with a simple mission to advance the business of arts and culture. My guest today is Nancy Yao Maasbach, president of the Museum of Chinese in America. Nancy has held this position since 2015. Prior to this, Nancy was executive director of the Yale China Association, one of the oldest nonprofit organizations dedicated to building US-China relations. She has also held staff and board positions at the Community Fund for Women and Girls, International Festival of Arts and Ideas, Goldman Sachs, CNN, and others. Nancy is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a lecturer at the Yale School of Drama. Now, many of us here in the Tessitura community first got to know Nancy through her stirring innovator talk at the 2017 Tessitura Learning and Community Conference. Her talk, titled "Michael Wong, Have You Eaten Yet?", introduced us to the important work of the Museum of Chinese in America, situated in New York City's Chinatown. Her museum, also known as MOCA, is dedicated to preserving and presenting the history, heritage, culture, and diverse experiences of people of Chinese descent in the United States. In 2019, Nancy was elected to the board of the Tessitura Network, and I have been honored to get to know Nancy even more since then. I've learned about her strategic and human-focused approach to forwarding the mission of MOCA, her innovation in spreading the word of a tiny organization with big dreams, and a willingness to make a late-night pilgrimage for ice cream sandwiches, this last part being part of her first Tessitura board retreat last year. Now, of course, the world has changed since those happy ice cream moments of yore. And of everyone I know, no one's world perhaps has changed more in the last 6 months than Nancy. And I'll let her tell you about that in a moment. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Nancy Yao Maasbach, president of the Museum of Chinese in America. Nancy, welcome.
No, thank you so much. And in that photograph, as you might notice, and I had the larger ice cream offering than your colleagues, and I don't even know if you were eating ice cream. But I love Tessitura, and I'm so honored to revisit this community and share a little bit about where we are from that point in my Michael Wong talk. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. It has been a heck of a 6 months, I know. And in fact, I wanted to start with a picture. And this is, I think, a picture of the last time you and I were together. I'm realizing I was actually wearing the same exact shirt that I'm wearing now. I didn't do that on purpose. So this was January 23rd, 2020. We are in the lobby of the Museum of Chinese in America. And I was there to get caught up with you on board-related things. And as we sort of swiveled around to take the picture, you grabbed a book out of the gift shop, because you said, we have to have a book. We have to have something that says Year of the Rat. This was the eve, I believe, of Chinese New Year. And after we were talking, you were going to be moderating a discussion about the Year of the Rat, so it was very much on your mind. And before we get into what happened in the days after this picture, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that talk that you moderated that night.
Andrew, I was so looking forward to that. It was so good to see you in New York and visiting MOCA on one of your regular stops by to visit all the members of the community. And I remember I was in such high spirits that night because actually it was the eve of Lunar New Year Eve. So the eve of Lunar New Year Eve is when you really start preparing. You think about the new year, you start making plans, you get your house ready and all of that. And it was the last program before we were going to take a little bit of a sort of a breath and then really forge into the Lunar New Year planning and programming. And I'm not superstitious. I basically said, oh, these two wonderful friends who are doing this talk about the Chinese zodiac system, Ken Smith and Joanne Lee. They do it every year. They have the zodiac book, And we were excited about doing that. And so I left you and we went to do the program. And during the program, we have over 100 program participants. And Joanne and Ken proceed to say, this is going to be the worst year in 60 years. You know, and there are like some nervous chuckles in the audience. And everyone's like, well, what do you mean? How do you know that? We've consulted every Chinese zodiac person, and they have said this year is going to be the worst year. There'll be internal and external forces, and it's going to be something that's very memorable. And again, nervous chuckles. And then thinking back about the year of the metal rat, which happens every 60 years, you know, 1840 was a year of the metal rat. And a lot of people who know Chinese history, that was during the Opium War. So a terrible period of time. 1900, during the Boxer Rebellion, when many of the foreign students were murdered, a terrible year in Chinese history. 1960 was the first great Chinese famine, and also a terrible year. And then 2020. So they're basically suggesting that this is going to be one of the worst years ever, the year of the metal rat. And I'm going out to dinner with them, and after the talk, and still sort of like nervous chatter, but just getting along. And I get a phone call from my colleague, Neil Wu Gibbs, and I could not believe it. 5-alarm fire at the MOCA Collection Center. And I dropped everything. I did pay because we always have to pick up the bill, and rushed over to our collection site, was just 3 blocks away. And it was there, I just, it was as if someone had died that night when I was looking at that fire. It's an incredibly iconic building in the middle of Chinatown. Even just looking at this photo just makes me well up with emotion. It's someplace that my mother had, you know, visited for Chinatown Manpower when she was immigrant early in the 70s to gain English skills and typing skills and administration skills. I remember spending hours in that building just waiting for her, you know, as a young child does, you know, when her mom or dad has to do something. And that building housed all of the MOCA collection. So 85,000 items on the 2nd floor of that building, including our collections office. But then also there were 4 other tenants in that building, and each one of them in MOCA really represents the core of a neighborhood's services. There was a social service organization, Chinatown Manpower, one of the most renowned dance centers, the Chen Dance Center, that serves so many hundreds, thousands of young people who didn't really have the opportunity to access professional dance training. The senior center was there, also part of Chinatown Planning Council, and also a neighborhood association that was very well known, United East, for organizing young people in sports and activities. So the 5 of us really represent the core pillars of a thriving neighborhood community of service. And of course, MOCA was there to preserve it all. So this image is after the fire had been contained, probably a few days later. But you can see the 5-alarm fire in a very densely populated neighborhood does incredible harm. And thank God, number one, no one was hurt. And this happened around 8:45 on that Wednesday night, and that, you know, that everyone, there was no one injured. I mean, that's the number one, I think, takeaway from something like this happening.
Yeah, and I remember following, you know, because I was still in New York when this was happening, and you texted me and just let me know what was happening. But I was following, and I know so many, probably most of the folks on today's conversation were following this as well. I mean, you thought all was lost, right? I mean, I remember you being on national news talking about having lost your entire collection. So can you tell us what happened next?
You know, I'm a born and raised New Yorker. You know, I grew up in Flushing in Chinatown, and we, you know, anyone who has been in that area knows how dense that area is. There are shops, there are, you know, family businesses, there are small, you know, homes and 3 multifamily homes in that area. And a 5-alarm fire, first of all, the water that went into that building was, it was continuous. So from when I sort of ran over there around a little bit before 9, and coincidentally, a lot of the team were in Chinatown that night. And we were all there. We were just watching and just hoping that the water would stop, the hoses would stop. Because as long as the fire started on the upper floor, the 5th floor, I saw on the 4th floor, went up to the 5th floor. So we saw the 5th floor and 4th floor quickly were insalvageable. And then we were just hoping, because all of our collections were on the 2nd floor, that at least we could preserve some of the 85,000 items. But the hoses were going in so full force from 3 different hoses from Bayard and Mulberry Street. And we knew that the damage would be water damage if anything were to come out. So we waited there until past midnight until the hoses stopped. And then we're like, okay, the hoses have stopped. The 2nd floor seems still intact, and even parts of the 3rd floor seemed intact. So we all just took a breath, went to a local bar, got a drink, sort of collected ourselves, and then said, okay, let's meet back here in the morning because the hoses have stopped, and see what's going on. And by that time, a lot of people had already left. So the next morning, I arrived around 8 o'clock in front of the building, and the hoses were going full force again. And it looked like there were definitely at least 3, but 4, and I don't know when they had restarted, but it was coming down the fire escape. I mean, obviously the building had been flooded for hours. And I found out subsequently that the hoses had started back up at 3 o'clock. It's an old building. It's like an 1892 building, large 5-inch, 6-inch wood plank floors, and a lot of things were flammable. They were afraid that things were not completely put out, that they would catch fire. So they continued the hosing. So the total amount of water in terms of the hoses went for about 16 hours. So at that point, the New York Times did do an interview with us, and we're like, there is a time frame of about 24 hours that you need to get things out and start remediating them and preserving them and stabilizing them. And we knew that this was already going into very dangerous timing. And then the 5th floor roof collapsed onto the 4th floor because of all the water pressure. And the water pressure, then collapsed onto the 3rd floor. So this was looking very treacherous for us.
And so in the days that followed, I was following at that point from afar, but in the days that followed, you had pretty much the rest of the museum business in New York, it seemed like, was descending on you and offering help, and you were working with the city. I mean, and ultimately you did start to get artifacts out of the building. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, the MOCA team is so small. So we only have 13 people full-time and about 6 part-timers. And a lot of people are surprised by that because the sort of performance indicator around how many people we serve based on full-time staff is very, very high. And the feeling of the morning feeling was real, because I think, especially just looking over to my colleague Yao Ma, who I so respect and just think the world of her as a director of the collections, and her, our other colleague Kevin Chu, this is their life's work. And Kevin said at some point, which brought me to like inside tears, but I was trying to stay strong. Kevin said, I just thinking back, like, what did I do for the last 6 years? And he's, he's a young person. He's in his like real first full-time, professional career. And he's been working at the museum for 6 years, in and out in that collections. And he's like, well, I was just thinking, like, what did I do for the last 6 years? And it crushed me to hear him say that, especially he's so passionate about one of the collections, Emile Beauchamp, which had this incredible 100,000 piece photographic donation to the Museum of Chinatown. So Emile Beauchamp was a photographer for a local Chinese American newspaper, and upon his passing, he had donated all his photographs to the museum. And that, and Kevin had written this wonderful piece for the CUNY Journal about those photographs in that collection. And those photographs are just about to be exhibited at the Center for Jewish History, where we had started a partnership. So, all of these things around the collections, we are the collection. The Museum of Chinese America equals the collection. We are inspired by it. We are, preserving it. We are all about the collection. So it's like taking out your heart and just sort of like, and so the feeling of mourning and like the fear, and then I can't tell you the mixed emotions that I've never felt so ripped apart as I did in those days after. And I went home and I just couldn't even focus on anything at home. And the next morning I said, to my family, I said, do you mind if I just stay in Chinatown for the next few days? And my daughter, of course, she's always like game for, that type of support. She's like, I'm going with you. So my daughter and I went in and we stayed in Chinatown for the next few days just because we wanted to be close to see if there's anything that we could do. And we were pushing really hard to get anything out that we could possibly get out. And the Department of Citywide Administrative Services that manages that building, because that's a city building, said, we're going to try to go in and get some things out. And we were like, tell us what to do, tell us when to be here. We'll be here 3 a.m., 2 a.m., we'll be here whenever, we'll get volunteers. So the volunteers were incredible. They came out in full force. Once the article hit the New York Times that Saturday, the power of the Times is a real thing. That is a lesson I will never forget. We never saw such care, encouragement, adoration, partnership, camaraderie, every aspect of our emotions were fed by people who had seen the Times article. And I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful for that coverage, because it really set us apart in terms of being in a situation that people knew we wouldn't be able to handle. I think that's the other thing. And the internal corporate, I guess, for lack, organizational culture of the museum, we have a joke, and those who speak Mandarin will understand what I mean. We say MOCA sudu, and sudu is a pace, right? We have a certain MOCA pace. We know we're understaffed. We know we don't have the resources, but we have this yes, we can attitude about everything we do, because we are all purpose-driven, mission-driven people to do the museum's work. So we always say, it's okay. It's almost like, I don't know if anyone grew up in the 70s, but like Wonder Twins activate. Like we had like Wonder Twins, we're like MOCA sudu, and then we can do it. And I think people looking in were like, time out, MOCA. You probably can't do this, and you can't do it on your own. And I don't know, just personally, my own upbringing, I think my parents were always like, you can do it, just run a little faster, wake up a little earlier, do whatever you need to do, but you can do this. And that attitude has always driven me that anything is possible. But I think I really needed the counsel of some people around us, the manuscripts and archives in New York City. They're amazing. If they want me to, scrub a document for the next 100 days without taking a bathroom break, I'll do it. They just came out and they're like, we're going to help you. And it's hard because when you have the attitude of like MOCA sudu, or you can do it, and you kind of like not used to taking help. And also we weren't used to people offering help in some ways. And I think all of that was also and you'll appreciate this, there's also that management, right? Management takes time and space. So when we have a lot of volunteers, we quickly, instead of like answering every volunteer, we kind of huddled. So the team huddled like 3 times a day in the first sort of 2 weeks, because we couldn't manage the love, I guess. And we're like, how do we manage it? So we kept huddling, and okay, someone would say, okay, I'm going to handle the volunteers. So we had a wonderful intern manage the volunteers. Another person was managing the inbox, the email inbox. Another person said, we're getting a lot of interest. People want to support financially. Should we do a GoFundMe? And we really thought about that, because we didn't want to take the situation, a tragedy, and necessarily, try to leverage off it or be misinterpreted for doing that. But then again, people are like, are you kidding? You don't know how much this is going to cost to repair, the collection. So we said, okay, then someone's going to manage the GoFundMe. So we sort of part and parceled it and just kept huddling to make sure that we were not missing how we want to handle it, but also how we wanted to make sure we get things done.
Yeah. There's a few things. There's so much in there. Talking about the grief. And then talking about how you and your daughter wanted to be there in Chinatown. It is no different than a sick relative, someone that you love, and just wanting to sit by their bed, and be there and almost put hands on them. I have to believe that combined with the Times article that you were quoted in, hearing that passion and that anguish for the fact that this collection is who you are, and seeing it in this state has to have led to that outpouring. I'm trying to imagine that intern, you know, who is, you know. So what's your, I mean, we've all been interns, right? But your job is, you know, MOCA was just like profiled in the New York Times because of a 5-alarm fire, and now you're in charge of handling the flood of volunteers that are coming to help. I mean, wow. I mean,
you know, we can't do anything without our interns, and I think this time and space that we're all living in, as far as understanding Black Lives Matter, understanding who we are, where we are, how we got here. For me and my own sort of thinking about management, you know, before I always felt like I was always very pro a flat type of structure. And especially in this time where, you know, we're the same age, Andrew, like, but listen, I'm not, technology wasn't in my womb when I came out, right? We acquired it in college. You know, technology is really more of a second skill. You know, for us, it's not an intuitive, natural womb skill, but I do feel like the younger generation, especially our interns, they are so much more aware and cognizant and sharper about technology and thinking about how to reach out and how to be effective in communications. And it is really about communications. I mean, all these platforms are communications. So something that we really, you know, are so, one of our big priorities is our internship program and making sure that people have responsibilities. And to be honest, like, we probably don't guide them as enough, but then at the same time, we're seeing it as a mutual partnership. Like, they're guiding us as much as we're guiding them. And for a small cultural nonprofit, it's hard. Your bandwidth is so limited. So if they're up for the challenge, and we try to describe what the challenge is and tell them, like, we're gonna fail as your managers, but at the same time, we think it's a great learning opportunity. And they, you know, they take that baton and they mostly do it.
Well, so that was January and February. And just, can you give us an idea of where things are, where things stand with the collection right at this moment?
As succinctly as possible, the community outpouring, and I really mean that in this, you know, community means a lot of different things, but I guess the Chinatown community outpouring, I will again forever be indebted to those who said, this is part of my history, and I want to do everything I can. So we saw a lot of people coming out to us who were residents of Chinatown, who care deeply about Chinatown. They're the same people who are protecting the Chinatown streets right now. They're the same people who, you know, are, you know, trying to do their best in preserving the history and of Chinatown, the richness of it, and at the same time sharing it with others who are interested and want to love it as well. So I think that there were 2 extractions of the material. The first only extracted 10%. Those were predominantly 3D objects, and we were taking photos of everything. So once we saw Mayor Eric Ng, he was the former head of Chinatown, Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. When his collection came out, we took a photo, and we're like, Mayor Ng, your collection is here. You know, we're so excited because, you know, I know he had collected it over decades. And when we saw Rocky Chin's donation of a sitting Buddha come out, and we saw it, you know, finally taken to the preservation site in Westchester, we took a photo, and, you know, it was getting dried. It was already dry, but just to make sure there was no other contaminants. And I said, oh, you know, Happy Buddha is getting a sauna treatment, you know, so things like that. Like, so we were able to then extract a second time, which was about 90%, more like 85% of the collection came out in the second one. And again, DCAS, the city council member Margaret Chin, Gail Brewer, you know, it takes a lot to stop a building from moving on in terms of its preservation or demolition, whatever the case might be, to say, we need to get these things out. And you know, I will call him out every day. Well, the commissioner of DCAS, Lizette Camilo, and the head of this project, the deputy commissioner, Quentin Haynes, again, forever indebted to them. You know, I'm not, I mean, I don't assign my political beliefs to the work that I do, but I will always be indebted to them for the priority that they place on that collections and extracting it. People need to say this is important. And, you know, in particular, Deputy Commissioner Quentin Haynes said, I get it, Nancy. Like, he said that to me several times. Like, I get it, Nancy. This is important. This is our history. And for so long, MOCA and the Chinese American history has been fighting for a place in the American narrative. And I don't think they fully understood what that meant to me when they said it. You know, and I still get emotional about, because, you know, this is many people's life's work to try to say the American narrative is broken, and, you know, what's taught in the classrooms isn't complete. And then for people to recognize it and to spend probably millions of dollars of city funding to say we must extract this out is a form of encouragement that you can't really put a dollar amount to. So right now the collection's it's in 4 different places, because we've been shuttered and because it's a very long process. There's a storage facility in Pennsylvania, and there's a storage facility in Nanuet in Westchester, New York. Part of it, a small part of it, is in the museum, more 3D objects, and then another part of it is in another part of the building. So next week, we are visiting both the storage units off-site to do, you know, a couple of the initial phases have been done, the freezer stabilization, you know, just basic mold extraction, and now we have to see what more needs to be done. So it's a lot. So you can.
So in any other year, this would be the biggest tragedy that would ever have befallen MOCA. But that was just January and February. Can we talk a little bit about what came next?
I have a smiling problem. Even when I'm talking about crisis, I'm like,
it's not a problem.
It's a coping mechanism. So I don't and you know, I forgot to mention, and I don't, you know, mind disclosing my age, but I'm 48, and I'm also a rat in the Chinese zodiac system. And you know, when a lot of people misunderstand that if it's your year, if it's the rat year and you're a rat, it's not good luck. It's the opposite. You should be super cautious. And maybe you thought it was good luck, and you mentioned it to a Chinese American person, but they didn't want to get you nervous, so they never told you the truth. So I'm telling you the truth now. So if it's your zodiac year, you should be super cautious. So I'll give you an example. My husband is a pig, and last year was the year of the pig, and he ripped his Achilles. So like, things happen. And I'm trying to not be superstitious because I'm a God-fearing Christian woman. But in the year of the rat, all these things have happened. I've been super cautious about it. And, you know, at the beginning of the Western New Year, January 1st, once we came back from that break, we already saw schools canceling their reservations with the museum because of the coronavirus. So as we all remember, it started, you know, much more in Asia, specifically in China, in the city of Wuhan, and we already got wind of that. And because I've done China work, you know, for years, I already heard from Wuhan that there were so many cases, and that the city was really containing it, and that the government were bringing in volunteers from all over the country to try to contain it as quickly as possible. And also, I had lived through SARS in Hong Kong, so I was living in Hong Kong in 2003. And immediately recognized what had happened there and how quickly the government had reacted. And, you know, I was working for Goldman Sachs at the time. I remember it kind of broke out in Vietnam in a hotel. It made headlines in Hong Kong. And the next day I saw 2 boxes of N95s on my desk at Goldman. So, you know, people sort of addressed it really, really quickly, knowing that containment and, you know, measures had to be taken to make sure it didn't spread. So we were hoping that that was going to be the same case. It would be contained in China, not really thinking it would be such a spread, and that a lot of the cancellations were somewhat discriminatory in basis or unfounded, because you also think of the population living in Chinatown, New York. Some of them have connection with Chinatown, but if the newer immigrants, if you really think where they're settling much more in Flushing and Sunset Park than they are in Chinatown, which are really, you know, sort of visiting 3rd and 4th generation Chinese Americans who don't necessarily have a deep connection with mainland China. So we saw that, and that was happening. And then fast forward March 14th, we hear from one of our part-timers who also works at another museum that she was afraid that she had been exposed within 2 degrees of someone who might have COVID and was getting tested. So we heard that at the end of the day. That night, we had a team meeting and decided not to take any risk. We're going to close for the weekend, sanitize everything, clean everything down, and then revisit it on Sunday evening. Between that Thursday and Sunday, the entire world shut down. So we saw every museum shutter, all retail shutter by that Sunday, and we've been there ever since. But subsequently, the discrimination that we sort of got a hint of in early January with the cancellations started to explode. And we saw racist events. Let me just say this, Andrew, growing up as an American-born Chinese in New York City, I've dealt with racism my whole life. I have compartmentalized that racism, everything from racial slurs to sexist, you name it, I have heard everything. And again, I have coping mechanisms for all of that, and I don't talk about it. And for all my life, all 48 years, endless amount of racist incidences. I've never once reported it. And I think that's something that I'm also sort of trying to manage with my own self and my own sort of growth. But we saw so many of those things happening, and we want to make sure that we were also on top of those events and recording them for the history's sake.
And it's just, I just can't imagine. There's certainly, and you've said this to me many times when we've talked about this, everybody's going through a lot this year, and this isn't a contest, right? But you're a museum president whose collection was decimated. You're in the epicenter of the U.S. COVID crisis when it hit in March, and you're the president of a museum of Chinese in America where Asian American, anti-Asian sentiment in the country is skyrocketing. You're dealing with multiple crises at once from multiple places. I think for the folks listening, how are you handling that, and how is the team handling that, and how are you thinking about trying to manage multiple crises coming in that you have virtually no control over?
Yeah, it's I cannot say enough about the MOCA team. I cannot say enough about what a pleasure it is to work with them, how much I love them, and just how much I'm proud of their ability to stay cool-headed, in all of this, and to be productive. We had people on our team had COVID, had coronavirus, and fortunately it didn't spread. It was after the fact, after being shuttered, and it's been remarkable. And we huddle every day. And then other thing is, this MOCA has a type of team where we have to remind each other to take a break and to make space for each other and to take mental health checks and to check in on them. And we need to remind them, because I think they're so passionate about the work that we could be. I say that to my husband all the time, and I think he thinks I'm crazy, actually. But I said I could sit at my desk all day, and I could be at the museum all day. I could be there 24/7, and I would never feel like I could do enough. There's an urgency in the work that we're doing. I think that we all feel that we cannot work quickly enough to deal with the racism, to tell the story, to help with our contribution to a more real and just American narrative. Not only that, we haven't even talked about the bilateral issues. Before all this, we saw escalating tensions between US and China, bilateral trade tensions, bilateral political, bilateral security issues in the Spratlys. There are so many flashpoints that start with CHINA or ESE. I mean, whatever you want to say, these are the major flashpoints globally right now. And that all concerns me, and I think it all concerns the team. And I say this also because we still have a fundamental problem in the US. Like, why do we care that US-China trade tensions are at their worst? We care because often Chinese people in America are still considered foreigners. For whatever reason, my face still makes a lot of people think I don't speak English, and they wonder where I'm really from, and do I only use chopsticks? I mean, these things are rampant and they're common. And, and I think one thing also about people who are constantly dealing with racism is, the power of forgiveness that they have to continue to forgive and move on. That's something that really batters your mental stability. And at this time, I'm really worried about that in terms of too much too quickly. And that's everyone. We're all dealing with this. And add on, personal loss and all these other components, which I won't go into, but, these are all real components of our existence right now. So it's not a contest. And I think also we all manage things differently, and we need to find those outlets to sort of manage them. But I think the odd part of all this that has given me, and I think the team's strength, is that we've had so much time to reflect. So working in a museum, as many people might know, is, you could be interrupted any day. Your longtime member is downstairs and they just want to say hi. There's an incredible student, student intern group that's visiting. There's a group from Southern China that's coming in. There's a group from New Zealand that wants to see, so there are a lot of distractions in the day that you don't have that fluidity in terms of working on project things. And what we are grateful for is that we've been able to reflect, do project work, think, reflect some more. And I think what we're noticing in our space is that we've always been a museum of conscience. There's always been that we are seeking justice and equity in the American narrative. We are seeking justice and equity to understand that this Chinese American stories, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the legislation against Chinese people in this country and Asian Americans, the revoked citizenship of Chinese people who are living here, the immigration, all of these components of the history existed, right? They existed, and that groups of people have been affected by it, and most people don't know that those points in history occurred. So, in a lot of ways, we are realizing that our work has always been about developing that conscience. And now that museums are in such demand to supplement the work of what's happening in the classroom or what's not happening in the classroom, that we have a very important role to play. And you may have seen in the contest, the argument between the two football players. And now, like, my brain is blanking from the Patriots, when he sort of laid out an olive branch, he said, listen, I'm going to take you to the Holocaust Museum, and then we're going to go to the African American History and Culture Museum in DC together. Then we're going to grab some burgers, and then I'm going to learn from you, and you're going to learn from me. That was so exciting for me because he saw that museums are supplementing that narrative. I couldn't have scripted that more for him. I think any museum head couldn't have scripted that, because that's exactly what we're doing. But if we're doing that, and we all recognize and we're all cognizant that that textbook on US history is utterly imbalanced, then we must support museums. And museums must have a better and bigger role to be that conscience. And the question is, how do we do it well, and how do we do it right?
It's incredibly profound, and something that has really occurred to me as I think about the talk that you gave back in 2017 versus the words that you're saying today. It's the same museum, and as you said, you've always been a museum of conscience, but I get the sense that you were very much focused on history then, and that it seems to me that in the year of the metal rat, you're really focused now on today and in the future. Do you think that's a fair way to say it?
It's so accurate. And I think I clung to that history, and MOCA has clung to the history. And I think that was due I think it was in large part due to that frustration that no one knows the history. And that's exactly what the talk was about in 2017. Like, I want to, I want to figuratively shake people and say, you don't know there's this history, and it's the only legislation against a group of people. And that was happening right as the current administration was talking about Syrians and, the movement against, DACA and the Dreamers. And so there was so much immigration legislation getting discussed at that time, undocumented and so much. And I said, look, no, this has happened, and then again, what I also do, when telling that history is, I apologize. I wish that I had worked harder, I had worked earlier, I had worked sooner to try to get this out there, right? So the more people thinking about that history, maybe it doesn't repeat itself. But today I realize exactly what you said, that history matters. And I think it's the more sort of mainstream understanding of what MOCA is and what we're trying to do that maybe the New York Times helped, unfold for people, or maybe the NPR article, and all the other, Chinese newspapers have been with us all this time telling the work that we do. I think other people, it's hard to say, because when you're in a space where I had days where I wasn't sure it even mattered, because I wasn't feeling that support. Sometimes you do work and you're like, this matters, this really, really matters. And that's why I'm here. And that's why we're all here. It really matters. But if the world doesn't tell you it matters, you're constantly fighting. You're like, okay, but I'm pushing this really heavy cement wall and I have my, whatever powers, I am mom, what's your superpower? But like, you have your superpowers and you're using them, but but like the New York Times and all that mainstream coverage, I think, helped us realize this is not just about the past. This is about being a platform and being a pillar and being a force for helping ourselves and helping each other have a greater sense of justice and equity. And that's not in a political space. We're talking, we all want justice in this country, right? We all want equity. Those are the fundamental landmarks of this country. And it drives me bonkers when it becomes political like that. And this is something, and that we need to understand that there is justice and equity in this space, and that we will all be stronger if we can find that space. So MOCA, again, the word Chinese is not in our mission statement. We're not a museum by Chinese for Chinese. We're a museum by all for all, so that we can feed into a greater sense and understanding of ourselves and each other and this American narrative.
Well, I can't agree with you more. I think that it is not about one party or another. It's about common humanity and listening to one another and learning from each other. Nancy, I can't thank you enough. I normally sort of finish with a big question, but I don't even need to ask that question because you've already answered it. It is very clear that for your museum is a museum of conscience. It always has been, and that has come to the forefront in the last 6 months. And I think that your words are hopefully inspiring to museums and cultural organizations all around the world about the role that they need to play in the world that we're in today.
And I think we need to support each other. And I should have said also New York Times, NPR, Testatora. But the community around Testatora has always supported each other. And I think it's an incredible model for nonprofit arts and culturals to have a space where we can bounce ideas off each other, and that safe space. Mm-hmm. So that's something that it really started at that talk that I gave, I think in 2017, where I tried to put it together instead of speaking in a vacuum, but speaking to a group of 2,000 people, and then having that talk sort of in the back of my mind and just continuing on that path forward. But so I have to thank you, Andrew, and thanks everyone in the network. I really appreciate everyone who sent notes out and via LinkedIn and all the other mediums for during the fire. The Testatora network really came out in support of it, and I just, thank you so much for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy. And we're all continuing to root for the museum and for you, and can't wait to see the next act. Wishing you best wishes for the rest of the year of the Metal Rat. We'll get through it. And then we'll be on the other side of it. So,
yeah, stay safe, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you again, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And we will be back again soon.